Hi, my name is Shreyas, and my project is called Deal or No Deal, How Teams May Be Better Off in the Draft. So this is the table of contents of my presentation. So a quick bit about me. I'm Shreyas. My hobbies are sports. As you can tell, football definitely is my favorite sport. I like listening to music, spending time with my family, and my passion and what I want to study in college and pursue in the future is finance and economics. And I go to Evergreen Valley High School and I'm a junior. I also wanted to give a special shout out to my mentor. He helped me brainstorm. He gave me lots of ideas. He gave me some anecdotes from his work, and he works in like sports management consulting. So I thought that was really cool to get a perspective about that. And he really helped me with my data collection and like how can I manipulate that data. So how did this presentation come to be? So ever since I was a little kid, as you saw from that first picture, I've always loved the sport of football. And I grew up playing with my dad and my friends, and I even played in high school. But I wanted to know how I could connect my hobby with what I wanted to do in the future, as like with economics and finance. So the goals and objectives for this project were I really wanted to analyze how teams would manage their salary cap in order to stay successful. And I wanted to see how different factors could affect the team's off the field performance, which means how much money they make off the field through revenue and all sorts of different things. And I took in a lot of economic factors such as GDP and disposable income. And finally, we observed how NFL teams, the NFL draft, and how it plays a big factor in a team's success. So my hypothesis was that by looking at an NFL team over the past 5 seasons, both via on the field play, which means how many playoff appearances they have, and their off the field revenue, which is total revenue, is more strongly correlated to their draft strategy, which I'll get into very soon, than high end off-season spending additions, which I will also elaborate on soon. So before we get into my first test, I wanted to mention some terms. So the NFL draft is basically a 7 round selection of NFL players from college. So you may be wondering what is so important about the NFL draft? Well, the players in the NFL draft, since they're from college, they're very unproven. So therefore they make a lot less money. So for example, an average draft pick makes around $700,000 per year, while a veteran player can make upwards of $5 to $10 million easily. And what are the playoffs? So playoffs are the elimination style tournament which determine the winner of the league. So many of you may watch the Super Bowl. So the last two teams would play in that. So in our first test, I collected the amount of draft picks each playoff NFL team had over the past 5 years and versus their playoff appearances. So this is a graph I made. And as you can see, a lot of the teams kind of with more playoff appearances, which means they're more successful, have a lot of draft picks, but there's a lot of outliers too. So therefore, I did a second test, which basically analyzed the value of these draft picks. So the higher value picks were picks from 1 to 3. If you may remember, it's 7 rounds, right? So the top 3 rounds are the higher value picks, and the later rounds, 4 to 7, are the lower value picks. So we found out that the teams in the top 10, which means the top 10 most draft picks in the 5 year span, had the same amount of earlier round picks, 16.1 and 15.4. But the more interesting part was that the later round picks, there was a 10 pick disparity, which is very important. So the results for our first test was that out of like the 27 teams that made the playoffs, 60% made it more than 3 times in the top 10 of draft picks, while only 35% of the remaining teams made it more than 3 times. So in the first test, we saw that the teams that had more draft picks had more success as well. And for our 1B test, we know that they have 10 more later round picks and they retain them at the same rate, which means that they're able to utilize these draft picks and get value out of those later round selections for very cheap. So for our second test, this is the one about like revenue and profit outside of like on-field success. So this is just the data we gathered. I just wanted to show because spent a lot of time getting all this data, and this is all the stuff we did. So by analyzing the revenue and profit changes for each team, and we compared it with the draft selections once again. So the top 10 and the bottom 17. So the results were that the top 10 teams in draft selection averaged $496 million in revenue and 47 draft selections, while the bottom 17 teams averaged $447.93 million in revenue and 36 draft selections. So we can see that the teams with more draft picks made around $50 million more. So that would lead you to think that, oh, wow, the more draft picks I have, the more money I have. However, when we look at the outliers, like the Dallas Cowboys, they skew the data. And we can see that really the top 10 teams in draft picks and the bottom 17 teams really make the same amount of money. So, but by being better on the field, by winning more, does that mean your revenue goes up, right? Because you would think that the more wins you have, the more fans you get. So in this test, we saw that the top 10 teams in draft selections, which we already determined are more successful, had a 38.47 average revenue change, while the bottom 17 teams had 40.5. However, after we take away the outliers, we can see that all teams pretty much have the same revenue change. So we can see that there's no strong correlation between on-field success and revenue change. However, when we analyze the economic factors, we can see this differently. But before we do that, I need to mention what these economic factors are. So disposable income is the money left over after taxes and necessities, after like necessities are paid for. So it's what people spend on leisure, basically. And GDP is gross domestic product, and it's a way to measure the economic activity of metropolitan areas. So we can see that larger markets, Philadelphia, Dallas, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, Las Vegas, generate substantial revenue because they have these greater GDPs and greater higher disposable incomes, which means that fans are willing to spend more money on their teams. Like it doesn't matter if they're successful on the field or not, they have more fans who are willing to come to their games. However, smaller market teams like Chargers, Colts, Bills saw significant revenue boosts from these good draft picks and being more successful. But this underlies a complex relationship between market size, team performance, and financial outcomes in the NFL. So our final test is using certain examples of teams to see how they spend money in free agency. So free agency is also connects to on-field success, not so much off the field. So free agency is a market where teams can sign player whose contract has expired. And these players typically make a lot more money than these draft picks. So the first team we'll analyze is the Jacksonville Jaguars. So essentially, they spent an average of $162 million per year in free agency. And that's that's insane because the salary cap is roughly $200 million and they're spending 162 per season. And the salary cap accounts for all players. So they're spending 162 on new players each year. However, it led to a mediocre and poor performance. And they failed to become a championship caliber team that many fans hoped for. The next team we'll examine is the Rams. The Rams are the complete opposite of the Jaguars. And they spent a league low only $38.4 million over the past few years. However, they did make a couple of trades, which is noteworthy. So the Rams are risky but successful. And they won a Super Bowl title in 2022. And they demonstrated that through spending less money, they can achieve more success. And the Packers are kind of a middle team. They did not spend the least amount of money, but not the most. And they were quite successful, making the playoffs 3 out of 5 years. So our conclusion is that draft strategy is very important for success, but free agency spending is not as important. But we can see that on-field success does not directly translate to off-the-field financial success, but that is more influenced by market size and other economic factors such as disposable income and GDP. And strategic drafting is essential for competitive teams. these are my references, and if you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Great job, Shreyas. And I could talk to you about football all day. I love the presentation, but very interesting, right? That you draft picks obviously can help with the success of the team, but I think the most clear takeaway was smaller market teams, success is important,
Yeah.
right? If you're a smaller market team, success is important. But what was your aha moment in the research? What was it that you might have been surprised by?
I think you said it. So while me and my mentor, we were analyzing the data that we found, we were like, wow, these smaller market teams have such a great revenue change per year. And then we saw like the scope of the team over the past 20 years, right? And teams like Buffalo or Cincinnati, just these past 5 years, they've been successful and they've seen the most uptake in the league out of any team. And I thought it was pretty cool that like because they're successful now, they're seeing like 50%, 60% revenue change per every like 2 years, which is like crazy.
And what's interesting about those teams is they did it mostly through the draft, right? They
Yeah.
didn't do a lot of it through free agency. So, cool presentation and good takeaway, Shreyas. Nice work.
Thank you.